Well, Kunal Bahl doesn't need much of an introduction. He's a poster boy for Indian startups, and startups are perhaps the one that defines India's future, the entrepreneurial spirit. But with all that introduction, I was just having a casual chat with Kunal, and he's made me very nervous about being a competitor. He says the one thing he hasn't done and he wants to do in life is to be a newsreader. So I don't know if you're going to put all of us out of jobs. What's the plan on that?
Yeah, I think maybe AI will put the newsreaders.
We'll have an AI
jobs,
Kunal to get down to it. Kunal, but seriously, the topic of the conversation today is about Indicorns. It's a term that you've come up with because a lot of the startup jargon is, business as we used to call it at one time, it became startups, is a very American jargon. And given the kind of presence we've had in India, perhaps time to come up with our own, jargon as well?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having me here, Veera, and to the NDTV team. This is a great new forum you've set up with the NDTV World Summit. We've been celebrating unicorns for many years, but if you just trace back to understand why does this exist, why does this term exist? This term was actually invented by a venture capitalist in the US, in the context of the US, where companies over $1 billion are called a unicorn, right? Which is actually a mythical figure. And as I was reflecting on it over the years, having built a unicorn, having funded many companies which became unicorns, I just realized that why are we celebrating these when actually what our country needs right now is lasting, enduring businesses where startups are built off the back of real revenues and real profits. Right? There was a time 10 years ago, the ecosystem was too small for companies to become profitable relatively quickly. That has changed. 10 years ago, we had 100 million internet users in India or 150 million internet users in India. Now we have over 1 billion. India's income levels have gone up. We are seeing companies who want to be profitable become profitable in 2-3 years from the starting point. So then why is there an obsession with a currency that is not ours, right? An amount which is irrelevant in our context, like why 8,300 crores, right? Why? Because that is what a $1 billion is. Why are we obsessed with 8,300 crores? Why are we obsessed with a currency that is obviously not ours? We generate revenues and profits in Indian rupees, not in dollars. And a mythical figure. If you think about it, it doesn't make any sense. Rather, isn't it better we build businesses with the intention of making them lasting and enduring and aim for goals which enable us to get there? So 100 crore revenue business which is profitable. Because the moment a company becomes 100 crores in revenue and is profit making, it is very likely it's not going to go out of business, right? And will keep going from strength to strength. And what India probably needs right now is not 100 or 200 or 300 unicorns or 500 unicorns. We need 10,000 Indicorns because that will form the bedrock of the startup ecosystem.
Right.
And that will create the steady flow of companies that eventually become listed companies and large businesses.
As you explain that fundamental, and it's a fascinating concept, but it's also an attitudinal expression, right? Like yesterday we had the Prime Minister here speaking about AI is not just for artificial intelligence, but aspirational India as well. When you come up with jargons and terms which are local in nature and something that's homegrown, it also reflects that aspiration.
No, absolutely. I think the Prime Minister has made an indelible contribution to the startup economy. When I started my startup journey, I was 23 years old in 2007. There was nothing known as a startup. There was no nomenclature called a startup, however strange that may seem right now. You either did a business or you did a job, right? And the business was typically the one you inherited or you joined your parents' business. There was nothing sitting in the seemingly twilight zone of this is not your family business and it is also not a job. There was no word for it. Imagine. Startup came into national parlance only around 2015 when the Startup India initiative was evangelized and launched by the Honorable Prime Minister. And because of that, startups gained legitimacy. They gained recognition. Suddenly parents in small towns were not aghast the moment their 23-year-old child who went to IIT after a lot of struggle by the parents, saying, I will not join McKinsey or Goldman Sachs or Microsoft or Google, and I'm going to start something and I'm going to make zero money for the next few years, and likely we are going to be in debt during that period. They were no longer aghast at that. And that contribution, I think, significantly goes to the Prime Minister, and obviously the role models that have now become available to the younger generation of founders.
And you know, for instance, I was wanting to ask you, when you come up with a term like snap deal, it's again something that's inspired. You studied in the US, and it's inspired by that the American influence. Over the last, let's say, 15 years, what's changed at that psychological level? I mean, is it the American influenced or American educated, or one who's gone abroad, who's come back here? I come from Bangalore, where you have most in the startup world speaking with an accent. Is that changing really in terms of how Indian homegrown startups are seeing themselves?
You know, what has really changed over the last 15 years, I would say, is until about 2017, before the 4G revolution came about, we had very few internet users in India, relatively. And it's not only the number of internet users were fewer, the usage of internet was a lot fewer in terms of per GB per user, or GBs per user per month. That took off after the 4G revolution that happened around 2017. And suddenly the opportunities, which were more domestic in nature, exploded. You know, I always say that India has mouth-watering opportunities, but eye-watering challenges. And that is very evident in the startup economy as well. But the mouth-watering opportunities also didn't really exist as pervasively as they do now prior to 2017, because there weren't just enough connected users in our country who were using the internet enough. Because how will you digitally provide services and products if there aren't enough people to provide them to through the digital medium? And so what has happened post 2017 is increasingly, because I've been investing in companies. While at my heart I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a founder, but I've also been supporting the startup ecosystem by investing my own capital along with my co-founder Rohit. And I would say pre-2017, a lot of the ideas were, Uber for India, X for India, Y for India, etc., where it was business models that were proven and they seemed like low-hanging fruit to build in India. Nothing wrong with that. However, what has changed post-2017 is a lot of domestic challenges and domestic issues have been identified by founders and turned into opportunities. And now what we see is mostly like 80% or 90%, if not 95% of the companies we meet who come pitch to us at Titan Capital for funding are solving domestic problems and going after domestic opportunities. That is so encouraging, because if you now fast forward 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you imagine the kind of companies, products, and services that are going to be built by the upcoming generation of founders.
And so would you believe that it's easier to be an entrepreneur today than when you started off? Would you believe that your journey would have been faster if it was now than then?
I don't, some things change for the better, some things change for the worse. I feel that back then, the good thing was that there were fewer companies, so you could take your time to build something. But the bad thing was there weren't enough users, right? So you had to, sort of slog it out for many years. Now it's the inverse of that. The inverse is that there are lots of users, there's disposable income, which is a lot higher. However, there is insane amount of competition. There was very little financing, like venture capital, available easily. Now I think in Bangalore, where your city, I think you throw a rock, it'll throw up money from the ground.
It throws back dollars. No, but when you talk,
well, hopefully rupees.
Hopefully rupees, yes. Yeah. Not in millions, but in crores. Yeah. But when you say, when you're talking about money, the one way that startups have traditionally raised money is through venture capital, right? Now, you have had a successful IPO as well. How does that change? I mean, post-IPO, how does it change your life? Do you wake up in the mornings at 9:30 and check the Sensex, whether it's red or green? Or, how does that change? And also, what's the learning for the startup, ecosystem itself in terms of raising funds?
Yeah, I think that's a great point you bring up. For the longest time, there was a lot of, I don't want to use the word disdain, but a lot of question marks about the endurance of the startup ecosystem. That is it all very transient and fleeting and opportunistic, or is it something which will be long-term, lasting, and like, are we building forever companies, right? Like a lot of the listed companies are forever companies. I think what the IPOs of some, and successful IPOs of many of the companies that have listed, and we've been fortunate that ours has also been received very well this year, of our software company, Unicorns, is that it is now, the tide is turning, the tide of perception is turning, that the skepticism is turning into, oh, you know, maybe they are building good companies, or maybe these companies will be lasting companies. Maybe these companies are not fly-by-night operators. Maybe the founders and operators of these businesses didn't get into it just to get rich, but they actually are purpose-driven and are committed to building their companies for 5, 10, 15, 30 years, like the traditional industry promoters have been, right? So I feel the IPOs are really, really helpful in raising the bar, raising the ceiling for the upstarts, the new companies, to say, where do I want to be? Because earlier, it seemed like the bar of performance was, did I become a unicorn or not? Now the bar of performance is, of hyper performance is, did I build a business which was solid enough, profitable enough, and with great governance and great culture, that it has the ability to go public.
So when you are a venture capitalist and you're looking at an investment, would that be a critical question? Look, I know that this can possibly make money in the next 3 years, but is this a resilient idea?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. When we meet companies, we are meeting them when it's just like two guys and a PowerPoint and maybe like 2 lakhs of revenue. I remember when we invested in Mamaearth, which was one of our investments, which is now goes by the corporate name of Honasa. They were doing 5 or 6 lakhs of revenue, and really smart founders, small team of 8, 10, including the 2 co-founders, Varun and Ghazal. In our head, what was going through our mind was, as it goes through when we meet other companies, in 5, 6 years, can we see this becoming a public company, right? 5, 6 years is too short a period of time, but to their credit, they became a public company in 7 years. But our first step, we think, is, can this become an Indicorn, like 100 crores of revenue and profitable? Because then we know from there it is just projecting out a growth rate till the point they become large enough that the public markets would find them of an acceptable scale and size to come in to list.
Interesting that you make that point, and as you point that out, make that when you were answering that question, there's also the rock bottom that a startup or an entrepreneur hits through, right? In your own personal life, and not from a theoretical point of view, was there a moment when you turned around and said, what you worked with companies before you started off as an entrepreneur, was there a moment when you said, no, look, I made the wrong choice, I shouldn't have been here? And how do you deal with that moment, and how do you get over it?
Yeah, I think any founder who says that they haven't gone through their low points is lying. Everyone from the outside thinks a successful company started here and came here and it was a straight line. It's actually a zigzag, up and down, twisty-turny journey to get to an eventual, what is perceived as success externally. We've had many, many low points. I think we may have run out of money at least 6 times over a 16, 17-year period. There have been so many near-death situations. But I think at each point, the key is to find the courage to continue. Many times you'll find yourself at the bottom of the abyss. And many people don't know what bottom of the abyss actually feels like. Bottom of the abyss feels like things are so bad, there are no answers. Any advisor, well-wisher you go to, even they can't advise you or what to do. Even they are almost hinting, chalo band kar do. Right? There's nothing you can read, no podcast you can listen to, no interview you can watch that will inspire you or give you ideas of getting out of that rut. That is what bottom of the abyss looks like, and most people have not been there. And it's at that moment where you're at the absolute bottom, finding that little bit of courage to continue is what is needed. And every time we found ourselves at the bottom of the abyss, me and Rohit and our team have found that courage to continue. And we've realized before you know, you're out of the hole. But you need to always believe in yourself that we will come out of it this time also.
And that not only makes a strong company, resilient company, but it also makes a resilient individual. And you've been inspired a lot by Mr. Tata. You were sharing as well. That kind of a message that you got, or possibly something that has changed in Kunal when you started your journey to now, what would it be?
Yeah, I think Mr. Tata has left us with an enduring legacy of contributions and wisdom. And I think, at least for me, one of the things which is very, very endearing about my few interactions with him over the last many years that I knew him from 14 when he invested in our company was, just his humility and his memory. So I'll give you an anecdote, right, which is a really interesting anecdote. When I met him for the first time in 2014, I was in his office in South Bombay. And after we had a short discussion about our business, he said, I'd really love to invest if you will have me. So his humility is always like, he didn't assume that I'm Ratan Tata. Of course, if I tell you I want to invest in your company, you will take it. Of course, I would take it, right? But he never assumed that. But as the meeting was ending, he asked me, is there any other question you have? I said, I just have one request. He said, what is the request? He said, at some point, I would love for you to come and meet our team because it will change their life, right? Like they could never imagine meeting Mr. Tata. He said, okay, I will do it. So some time passed, he got really busy with some of his internal Tata responsibilities over the next couple of years. So he was not making that many trips to Delhi. And then COVID came right after. And somewhere towards the end of COVID, probably around 2-3 years ago, I met him at a wedding. And he was sitting like this because obviously he had started, having some health issues. So I just walked up to him and I said, Mr. Tata, I'm Kunal, because I just didn't want to assume that he'll suddenly recognize me, meets thousands of people. He said, of course I remember. And by the way, I still owe you that trip. So, that was the greatness of Mr. Tata. Imagine the tens of thousands of people he would have met over the years. He still remembered the 2014 promise in passing that he made to me. And I think that just is such an enduring lesson for everyone.
Make a promise, remember it, remember to keep it. My final question, would you rewrite the Kunal story in any way? When you look back, perhaps go to IIT, would that be the one thing that you missed out?
No, I think, I feel that I'm really blessed with so much serendipity that has happened in my life, right? So many things have happened that I want, that didn't go as per plan at that point in time, but set me on a path that was better for me, right? I didn't get into IIT, but I got into a good US college, which opened my mind, really helped me blossom. So at that point in time, it feels like you have failed, right? Because that's how society will make you feel. But I think if you can, like I said earlier, come out of the bottom of that abyss, just find that little bit of courage to continue. I remember the day I didn't get into IIT, everyone was really upset in my family. I went and played 3 hours of cricket, right? And just picked up from where I left off, said, chalo ab kuch aur karte hain. I mean, I was working at Microsoft in the US. They applied for my H-1B visa. I thought I'll live in the US for a few years, then maybe eventually come back or start a company there. They applied for my H-1B visa. One day I was sitting in my office. I got a one-line email saying, your H-1B visa has been rejected. You have to leave the country. So, and that's how I came back and started my journey as an entrepreneur. So I feel that if you keep working with hard work, sincerity, just imandari, kadi mehnat, eventually, over a period of time, success will follow you.
And that's a fascinating note to end this conversation on. Thanks so much, Kunal. I hope to see you as a newsreader soon, hopefully on NDTV Profit. Thanks very much for sharing this conversation.
Thanks.